It felt like the walls of the vacation house were closing in on me. The air was thick with tension, so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. I sat at the edge of the couch, trying to look busy, but honestly, I had no idea what to do with myself. Dad had been complaining for hours, and I could feel my patience wearing thin. He'd done it before, you know. Always the same thing. Nothing was ever good enough. The food wasn't up to his standards. The view was too boring. And this place? This place is boring, he'd said for what felt like the 100th time. I glanced over at my brother, Lucas. He was sitting across the room, his face unreadable, but I could tell by the way he shifted in his chair that he was getting as fed up as I was. The thing about Lucas is that he was always quiet, always watching. He didn't say much, but when he did, it was like he was waiting for the perfect moment to hit you with something that cut right to the heart. The ticking clock on the wall was the only thing I could hear besides Dad's constant grumbling. Tick, tick, tick. It was like time was crawling by, dragging every second into a painful eternity. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, a mix of frustration and helplessness. Why couldn't we just enjoy this damn vacation like a normal family? I ran my hand through my hair, trying to shake off the thoughts. Maybe it wasn't even about the vacation. Maybe it was about everything else. Everything Dad had been pushing aside for so long. Seriously, this is ridiculous, Dad muttered, his voice rising. I don't even know why we're here. It's not worth the money. I watched as his lips curled into a scowl, his eyes narrowing with displeasure. His hands were gripping the armrest of the chair like it was the only thing holding him back from throwing something. Every word he spoke felt like it was making the air thicker, heavier. Then I saw Lucas shift in his seat. He leaned back slightly, his eyes meeting mine for a brief second. There was that look, the one I couldn't quite read, but it made my heart skip a beat. His lips quirked upward just a little, a small, almost imperceptible smile. I didn't know what he was planning, but whatever it was, I wasn't ready for it. You're lucky we even came, Lucas said, his voice calm, but dripping with something I couldn't place. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sarcasm, it was something more, something quiet but fierce. His words hung in the air like a challenge, and I could feel the temperature of the room shift. Everyone stopped, staring at him. Even Dad fell silent for a moment, as though processing the words he'd just heard. I didn't know how to respond. My mouth was dry, and I felt the blood rushing to my face. Why did Lucas have to be so blunt? We were supposed to be a family, weren't we? But then again, hadn't we been pretending for years? Pretending that everything was fine? That the cracks didn't exist? Maybe Lucas was the only one who saw it. Maybe he was the only one who wasn't willing to sweep it all under the rug. Before I could say anything, Lucas stood up. I felt my stomach drop, and my palms started to sweat. I could tell something was coming. He reached into his bag, pulling out something small, wrapped in plain paper. My heart raced. I could hear the sound of my own breath, shallow, uneven, as I watched him unwrapping it, each movement slow and deliberate. The moment felt like it was stretching, the seconds dragging on forever. What was he doing? What was this supposed to be? Finally, he held it up. A plane ticket. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was a ticket back home. My mind went blank. I didn't understand. Was this some kind of joke? But the look on his face was dead serious. Then, he handed the ticket to Dad. You're on your own now, Lucas said, the words soft but cutting. The room went dead still. Not even the ticking of the clock could be heard now. I felt my chest tighten, my throat going dry. I couldn't look away. I watched as Dad's face slowly turned from confusion to something darker. His eyes darted away, but I caught the flicker of guilt. It was a split second, but it was enough. I knew then that something had shifted. And in that moment, I realized this was the beginning of something none of us could undo. I woke up the next morning feeling like a weight had been lifted off my chest, but also heavier in a way that I couldn't quite explain. The whole night had felt like an eternity, and now with the sun breaking through the curtains, I couldn't shake the tension that had settled into every corner of the house. It wasn't the kind of tension you could fix with a simple apology or a let's move on speech. No, this was deeper, like a truth had been dragged to the surface, and now we all had to stare at it, whether we were ready or not. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear my dad's muffled voice from the kitchen. I could tell by the tone that he wasn't shouting anymore, but that didn't mean things were better. No, things were worse. The calm after the storm was always the hardest part because you could feel the storm just waiting to brew again. I couldn't stop thinking about Lucas's words. "You're on your own now." He'd said them with a cold, almost unsettling calm, but there was something else there, something I hadn't fully grasped until now. I pulled a chair out at the kitchen table, sitting down slowly. The smell of coffee filled the air, strong and bitter. I could hear Dad's low muttering, but I wasn't sure what he was saying. I didn't want to know. The scene from last night kept replaying in my mind. The image of Lucas handing Dad that ticket, his face so unreadable, so sure. I couldn't understand it. Why had he done that? My hands fidgeted nervously with the edge of the napkin in front of me. My palms were clammy, and I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me. It wasn't even 10 o'clock, and already I was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that came from pretending for so long that everything was fine, that everything was normal. Dad finally noticed me sitting there, his eyes briefly meeting mine before quickly looking away. He didn't say anything at first, but I could feel the awkwardness hanging in the air like a dense fog. His brows furrowed, as if he was trying to come up with something to say, anything to break the tension. But the words didn't come, and I didn't force them either. What was there to say? I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for the inevitable. There was something about my dad in moments like this, when he was cornered or caught off guard. He was still the same man who expected things to go his way, the one who liked to have control, even when it meant tearing everything around him apart. But now he was different. Maybe it was the weight of Lucas's actions. Maybe it was the fact that something had shifted, and for the first time in ages he couldn't just pretend like everything was fine. I could hear him shift in his seat, his voice tight and careful. "I don't know what you want from me," he finally said, his tone strained, like he was trying to hold on to some semblance of authority. I'm just trying to make this work. All I wanted was a little peace, a little quiet time. This trip, this whole thing, isn't what I expected." His words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Was that his excuse? Was this what he had been holding on to all along? His disappointment with the trip? I could feel my frustration rising, and I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. The truth was, I had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Waiting for Dad to take responsibility for the way he had been treating us, for the way he had been treating me. "I'm not asking for perfection, Dad," I finally said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. "I just want us to be a family, not some broken version of it." His eyes narrowed as he looked at me, and I felt the heat of his gaze burn through me. His lips pressed together tightly, like he was fighting something. Maybe his own guilt, maybe his own regret. It didn't matter. I was tired of waiting for him to change. I was tired of waiting for him to see us. Just then, Lucas walked in. I couldn't help but notice the way the room changed the moment he entered. There was something about him. Something steady. Something unshakable. It was like he was the calm in the middle of a storm, but at the same time, the storm itself. And when he looked at me, I felt a sense of understanding. He didn't need to say anything. He had already said it all the night before. He sat down next to me, pulling the coffee mug in front of him without a word. His eyes met mine for a split second, and I could see it. The same determination, the same quiet defiance that had been in his voice the night before. It was like he was silently saying, "It's done now, no going back." And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about the vacation, or about Dad, or even about Lucas's bold move. It was about us, about the family we had been pretending to be for so long. Things were changing, whether we liked it or not. The question was, would we be able to survive the change? Would we even be able to face it head on? But as I sat there, with the faint hum of the morning around us, I realized one thing. Change was coming, whether we were ready for it or not. I could feel the tension in the room thickening as the morning dragged on. It was like we were all tiptoeing around a massive elephant in the room, and no one wanted to address it. I could see it in Dad's eyes. He was trying to hold on to his pride, trying to push back against whatever had been stirred up by Lucas's bold move. But I also knew something had shifted. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, that gnawing sensation that told me this was only the beginning of something much bigger. We were sitting at the table, breakfast long forgotten in front of us. The cereal bowls were half finished, the orange juice untouched. I couldn't even remember the last time any of us had really sat down and shared a meal together. The noise of silverware scraping against plates was replaced by the uncomfortable silence that hung between us. The tension was suffocating. It was like everything, every word, every glance, every movement was magnified, as if the smallest thing could set it all off. Dad was the first to break the silence, though it wasn't what I expected. He didn't yell. He didn't demand an explanation. Instead, he just stared at his coffee mug, his fingers tapping nervously against the ceramic. It was strange, seeing him so vulnerable. He had always been the type to barrel through life, never showing any weakness, but now, in the face of Lucas's quiet rebellion, he was starting to crack. "You really think that was the right thing to do?" Dad's voice was low, and there was an edge to it, like he was trying to keep control. "You think you can just throw me a ticket and expect everything to be fine?" His jaw tightened as he spoke, like he was trying to keep his anger contained, but it was clear he was struggling. "This is a family, Lucas. You don't just walk out on it because you don't like the vacation." Lucas didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice, didn't offer any excuse. Instead, he just leaned back in his chair, his hands folded calmly in his lap. "I'm not walking out, Dad," he said quietly. "I'm just making it clear. You've been walking out on us for years." His words hit like a slap. It was like the air was knocked out of me. I had known things weren't perfect, but hearing Lucas say it out loud, so calmly, was like a punch to the gut. I looked at my dad's face, and I could see the anger in his eyes. He was doing everything he could to keep his composure, but the hurt was there too. There was guilt hidden in the corners of his expression, but it wasn't enough to make him admit it. Not yet. I wanted to say something, wanted to back Lucas up, to call Dad out on all the years of emotional distance, the lack of connection. But I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat. I felt like I was drowning in all the things we hadn't said, all the things we had been too scared to confront. There was a long pause, and I could see my dad's hands start to tremble. His thumb traced the rim of his coffee mug, his gaze never leaving it. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you?" he muttered, mostly to himself. "You think this makes you the better person, don't you?" I could feel Lucas's tension. He was sitting perfectly still, but I knew him well enough to see the storm brewing beneath the surface. He didn't answer right away, but I could tell he was calculating his next move. It was like he was playing chess with Dad, and I had no idea what the endgame was going to be. The problem was, I didn't think any of us really knew. We had been walking around in this haze for so long, not really seeing each other, not really understanding what was going on. It wasn't just about the vacation anymore. It was about everything that had built up over the years. The unspoken resentment, the hurt, the things we had all swept under the rug. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, I could feel it bubbling up inside me too. Maybe it had started with Dad's complaints. Maybe it had started with Lucas's little act of rebellion. But it was bigger than that now. The truth was out in the open, and there was no way to put it back in the box. Lucas was right. Dad had been walking out on us for years, and now, for the first time, someone who wasn't afraid to call him out, was making him face it. The room was heavy with the weight of unspoken words, and I realized I couldn't sit back any longer. I couldn't just watch this all unfold without saying anything. But the question was, what should I say? What could I say that would make any of this better? Or was it too late for that? As I looked at Lucas, I knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to back down, and that scared me more than I was willing to admit. The air felt thick, and I could feel the heat rising in my chest as Dad's words hung in the silence. His face was still red with frustration, but it wasn't just anger that I saw in his eyes. It was fear. The kind of fear that comes from realizing you're losing control. And I could see it. He knew Lucas had Donnie. The air felt thick, and I could feel the heat rising in my chest as Dad's words hung in the silence. His face was still red with frustration, but it wasn't just anger that I saw in his eyes. It was fear. The kind of fear that comes from realizing you're losing control. And I could see it. He knew Lucas had done something that couldn't be undone. And he hated that. But what was worse? That Dad couldn't seem to find the words to fight back, or that Lucas wasn't giving him the chance? Lucas sat there, unmoving. I could hear his steady breaths, and it made the tension almost unbearable. He wasn't speaking, wasn't trying to justify his actions. He was just waiting. Waiting for Dad to respond, waiting for something to break, because it had to. None of us could keep pretending that things were okay anymore, not after everything that had been left unsaid for so long. My eyes flicked between the two of them, wondering who would make the next move. Part of me wanted to stay out of it, to just let Lucas handle things the way he always did. But then I realized something. This wasn't just about Dad and Lucas. This was about us. About me too. About the things I had been bottling up, hoping that they would somehow just disappear if I ignored them long enough. But ignoring them hadn't worked. They were here now, in full force, and I couldn't just sit back and watch it all fall apart. "Do you really think this will fix anything?" Dad finally spoke up, his voice strained. "Do you think kicking me out of this trip is going to make us a family again? Huh?" He slammed his palm against the table, and I flinched. The force of it was so sudden and unexpected that it made everything feel even more real, more fragile. I could feel my stomach knotting. It was hard to look at Dad like this. He wasn't the strong, untouchable figure I had always known. No. Right now he was just a man, struggling to hold on to what little power he thought he had left. The cracks were starting to show, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. I could see Lucas's jaw tighten. The decision had been made. And there was no going back now. His eyes never left Dad's face. His gaze was steady, unwavering. "I'm not trying to fix anything, Dad," he said calmly, his voice low but carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. "I'm just making sure you know how far we've fallen. You can't keep pretending like we're okay, like you're okay." Dad's face went white, and for the first time, I saw something break in him. It wasn't anger or defiance or pride. It was the hurt that we had all been avoiding for so long. His eyes flickered for a moment, and I could see the guilt. He wasn't just angry with Lucas, or with me, or even with this stupid vacation. No, he was angry with himself, and that was worse, because if he couldn't face what was really going on, if he couldn't admit how much he had failed us, then how could any of us move forward? The room was dead still. The only sound was the soft thud of Dad's breathing as he seemed to shrink in on himself. There was no comeback, no excuse. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on all of us, and for the first time, I realized Lucas wasn't trying to win a fight. He was trying to get through to Dad in a way none of us had been able to. I could see it in Lucas's eyes, that quiet resolve. He wasn't just standing up to Dad for himself. He was doing it for all of us, for the family that we had let slip through our fingers, piece by piece, year after year. And in that moment, something inside of me shifted. I couldn't just sit there anymore. I couldn't just let this go on. I felt my hand grip the edge of the table, my fingers trembling slightly as I finally opened my mouth. "Dad," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "We need to talk. We need to face this. Not just pretend that everything's fine and hope it will fix itself." Dad's eyes darted to me, his expression full of confusion. His lips parted as if he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He didn't say anything. And that's when I realized. He wasn't the only one who had to change. We all did. Lucas looked over at me, a flicker of something almost like relief in his gaze. Maybe he was surprised that I'd spoken up. Maybe he was glad that I was finally on his side. But either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was that we were all in this together. For better or worse, we were finally facing the truth. And now, there was no going back. The battle lines had been drawn. What came next could either tear us apart completely, or it could be the start of something different, a new chapter. But no matter what, we were about to find out just how much we were willing to fight for the family we had left. The silence stretched between us, as thick and suffocating as the humid air outside. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, every beat ringing in my ears like a countdown. It felt like the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for one final move, one final word to break the tension. The thing was, I didn't know if we were about to implode or if we would somehow find a way to pull ourselves back together. Dad's gaze was fixed on the table now, his hands clasped in front of him as if he were trying to hold everything together. His knuckles were white and his lips were pressed into a thin line. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as the father who always seemed to have all the answers, but as just another person. Flawed, struggling, trying to figure it out like the rest of us. Lucas's face was calm, but there was something about the stillness in his eyes that told me this wasn't just some grand gesture. This was a declaration, a line in the sand. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't going to let things stay the way they had been for so long. It was as if everything he had ever wanted to say, everything he had ever needed to say, was finally coming to the surface. "I'm done pretending," Lucas said, his voice breaking the silence. The words weren't loud, but they cut through the room with the force of a thunderclap. There was a coldness to his tone, a finality that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "I'm done pretending that this is okay, that you're okay, that we're okay. He paused, his eyes locked on Dad, and I saw something flicker in Lucas's gaze. Something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even bitterness. It was something softer, maybe even sadder. You need to change, Dad. You need to face what you've done, what we've all been avoiding. Or we'll keep living like this, stuck, broken, pretending we're still a family. The words landed like a slap, but the room was so still, so eerily silent, that it almost felt like time itself had paused. I couldn't even hear my own breath. The shock was too much. Dad's eyes darted between Lucas and me, but he didn't speak. He just stared, as if trying to make sense of what was happening. I saw it then, the vulnerability he had been hiding for so long. The facade had cracked, and behind it was a man who had no idea how to fix everything he had broken. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't watch him pretend. Not when everything was on the line. So I did what I had been avoiding for so long. I stepped in. I leaned forward, my voice quieter than I expected. Dad, we're not asking for perfection. We're asking for you. We want you to be present, to be here, with us for once. We're not asking you to be some perfect father. We just want to know you care. We want to know that you still care about this family. It was like a wave had crashed over the room. The air suddenly felt lighter, almost unbearable in its rawness. Dad's face twitched, and for the first time I saw something break in him. The tough exterior he had kept up for so long was shattered, and I saw the weight of his years of regret, of missed opportunities pressing down on him. His lips parted, but no words came out. Then, without warning, he stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back in the process. His hands shook as he wiped his face, and I could see the tears in his eyes. Tears he had been hiding for so long, probably longer than I'd ever realized. I don't know how to fix this, he said, his voice cracking, raw with emotion. I don't know where to start. It was a simple admission, but in that moment it felt like everything had shifted. The weight of his walls crumbled, and I realized that he wasn't just failing us. He was failing himself, and that was something I hadn't understood until now. There was a long pause, and I could feel my own heart in my throat, the air thick with emotion. I didn't know if this was the resolution I had been hoping for, but it was a start. A real start. Something had shifted, and I could feel it in my bones. Lucas stood up too, his expression unreadable, but somehow calm. We can't change the past, Dad, he said softly. But we can change the future. We can start fresh if you're willing, but it's up to you. I watched as Dad nodded slowly, his head dropping as if carrying the weight of the world. I'll try, he whispered. I will. I swear I will. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. There was no grand, dramatic hug, no sudden moment of clarity that fixed everything. But as the room settled into a new, quieter kind of silence, I realized that something had changed between us. It wasn't fixed, not yet, but we had taken the first step. We had faced the truth. The days that followed weren't easy. In fact, they were probably harder than anything we'd faced in a long time. But they were real, and that made all the difference. We had finally ripped the Band-Aid off the wound we had been ignoring for years, and while it hurt like hell, it was the first step toward healing. The family we had been pretending to be for so long, it wasn't perfect, not by any means, but it was ours. And maybe that was enough. We spent the next couple of days in a kind of uncomfortable calm. Dad was different, though. I noticed little changes that gave me hope. He didn't snap at Lucas when he was sarcastic. He didn't complain about every little thing. I could see him trying, really trying, not to slip back into old habits. It was small, but it was something. And for once, it felt like we were finally starting to understand each other, instead of just assuming everything would stay the same. At one point, I caught Lucas looking at Dad across the room. There was no animosity, no anger in his expression. It wasn't forgiveness either, but there was something in the air between them, a quiet understanding that had never been there before. They weren't quite friends yet, but they were getting there. And for Lucas, that was huge. I couldn't help but feel like this trip had changed us, not in the way we'd hoped or imagined when we first got here, but in a way we needed. We were all forced to face the things we had been running from, and while it hadn't been easy, it had been necessary. Sometimes you need to have those difficult conversations, the ones that make your stomach twist, the ones you put off for so long. Because if you don't, you keep pretending, and pretending never makes anything better. The last night of our vacation, we all sat on the porch together, watching the sunset. It was quiet, peaceful even, in a way that was different from before. No one was complaining. No one was on edge. It felt okay. There were still unspoken things between us, things we hadn't fully dealt with, but we were getting there. We were trying. And that, for me, was enough. I leaned back in my chair, looking up at the fading sky. My dad was sitting across from me, sipping his drink, a slight frown on his face, but his eyes were softer. And Lucas was quiet, watching the horizon with a calm I hadn't seen in him before. He had done what needed to be done. He had forced the truth to come out, and we had all had to face it, kicking and screaming, but maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if we would ever be the family we thought we were supposed to be. But in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes families aren't perfect. They're messy, and they hurt each other, and they fall apart. But they can also come back together. They can heal if you're willing to put in the work. And maybe that's the lesson we all needed to learn. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't the kind of peace that meant everything was fixed, or that we had all suddenly become perfect versions of ourselves. No, this was something different, a quieter, more fragile peace. A peace that came from knowing we were trying. We were here. And that was enough.